Okay, in the next few videos we're going to be looking through what's meant by asymmetric information, how it leads to both adverse selection and moral hazard, why it's inefficient, and then how the government can intervene to achieve a more efficient allocation of resources. So first things first, in a perfectly competitive market, so if we assume no government intervention, then we would be assuming that economic agents, so individuals, consumers, businesses, are making fully informed, rational decisions. They know everything about the prices, they know everything about the quality of products, the condition, the prices of other products in the market, and the quality of those products as well. But sometimes firms don't have perfect information, so sometimes we don't know the full benefits of the product. We don't know whether the price is good value, and therefore that prevents us from making rational decisions. So asymmetric information is when one party to a transaction, either the buyer or the seller, has more information about the good or service than the other party in the transaction. And that can often lead to people making incorrect decisions, which leads to an inefficient allocation of resources. So examples of when the buyer or seller has more information, where hidden action can occur. For example, when you get car insurance, the buyer can have more information about how they're likely to drive the car than the seller, and therefore they can act in a more risky fashion. That would be an example, because their actions can't be observed by the other party. When you go to a mechanic, the seller has more information about the state of your car than you do, and they may decide that they need to fix things that don't really need fixing. Then you get overcharged, and that's inefficient. In terms of hidden characteristics, that's when one side of the market knows more about the product than the others. Knows more about the product's characteristics than the other person in the market. So a good example of that is when you sell a second-hand car. The person selling it might know that the product is faulty, that there's issues with the quality, whereas the seller doesn't. The buyer doesn't, and then they end up purchasing adversely. So often the seller knows more about the quality, reliability, and features of a product than the buyer. And if the government doesn't intervene, the seller may make false statements about the quality of their products, which will then lead to suboptimal purchases by the buyer. So the buyer purchases adversely as a result of not knowing all the details of that particular product. So, for example, adverse selection. Adverse selection is the idea that when one party knows more about the product than the other, the uninformed party may purchase adversely, resulting in an over or under allocation of resources to the production of that good or service. Good examples would be used car salesmen. So they might sell you cars that have features that you didn't know about. Mechanics say there's things wrong with your car that aren't, so they can get more money. Jewelry salesmen quote that things are like 10 karat gold when they're not. And that all leads to a lack of information, which means price signals are not working to maximize our living standards or maximize efficiency, which basically is a fancy way of saying that prices don't reflect the true values of things and prevent us from making irrational decisions. So adverse selection can lead to suppliers charging too low a price for some consumers because some consumers are skeptical. So what can actually happen in the market for car insurance is that for second-hand cars, is that people get overcharged for dodgy second-hand cars. Then good, reputable second-hand car dealers can't sell at the price that they would like, and therefore there's actually an under-allocation of resources to good second-hand cars. Adverse selection can also occur when the buyer knows more than the seller, and we'll talk about that more in the next video. So it can occur when either party has more information. So here's some examples of asymmetric information. So when the seller has more than the buyer, examples you can use are second-hand cars, dentists, mechanics, people selling herbs and supplements, and jewelry. We'll talk about each of these individually. When the buyer has more information than the seller, we've got things like health insurance and car insurance are probably your two main examples. You could also focus on in the labour market when you're going for a job. They're probably the key ones to focus on. That is more than enough there. Second-hand cars example. So with the second-hand cars example, the seller of a used car will usually know the defects of their vehicles quite well, but the buyer often doesn't. So that's the asymmetric information. The seller knows more than the buyer about the quality of the car. A used car salesman may sell you what we call a lemon car, which is a car with many faults that you didn't know about as the consumer. And this leads to the initial adverse selection because people buy cars with defective products. So buyers buy a lemon car, it costs them thousands and thousands of dollars in repairs. That's clearly not good for their living standards, therefore it's not efficient. They waste heaps of money on repairs, or the car breaks down and they have to buy a new car. That affects their living standards. That's the initial adverse selection. Okay, but when you're talking about why this is inefficient, not only is there an over-allocation of resources to dodgy second-hand cars, there's also an under-allocation of resources to good second-hand cars, because some people that are reputable sellers now can't sell their cars for a fair price because all of these other dodgy people in the market. So honest sellers often get prevented from selling at a fair price, which leads to an underallocation of resources to good second-hand cars. Too many resources will then be reallocated to new cars because people are too scared to get second-hand cars, when people would prefer to just get a good second-hand car. So consumers suffer because they'd like to get a good second-hand car, but they're too scared, so they have to pay a higher price. Good second-hand car salesmen suffer because they can't get a fair price for what they're trying to sell, and a mutually beneficial transaction does not take place. So summing up that whole market, the asymmetric information is that the second-hand car dealers often possess more information than the people buying the car about the defaults. Why does it lead to adverse selection? Well, consumers purchase second-hand cars they think are of good quality, and then they become faulty. They might have a bad battery, they overpay, price signals don't do their job in allocating resources. Second-hand car salesmen would also then find it difficult to sell quality second-hand cars because people are being ripped off, and this leads to an under-allocation of resources to good second-hand cars. Most people can say what the initial adverse selection is. I mean, if you buy a second-hand car and it's no good, then that's clearly bad for your living standards. But make sure in your answers you do the harder bit and say that good second-hand cars or reputable second-hand car dealers can't sell their cars for a fair price, and that's the under-allocation of resources. This market is therefore inefficient because not only are buyers of bad second-hand cars getting ripped off, but sellers of reputable, high-quality second-hand cars struggle to find buyers. Transactions that are mutually beneficial don't take place because people are too scared in that market. Other examples, with the dentists, service providers have more information than the customers, so dentists could lie and tell you that you need an extra filling or you need a root canal or something like that when you don't really, so there may be an over-allocation of resources to unnecessary treatments. The problem for that is not only do you pay for stuff that you don't need, and therefore you get overcharged as the consumer, but then in the future, people, other people that need to go to the dentist may not go because they know they're going to get overcharged, and then they get cavities and their teeth fall out. That's bad for living standards as well. In terms of the mechanics, asymmetric information occurs when you take your car to get serviced. Consumers know less about the workings of the car than the mechanic. The mechanic, therefore, may overcharge you for things you don't need, and that's inefficient. Your living standards are reduced, and now you've got less purchasing power. It also leads to a lot of wasted time because consumers want to spend a lot of time trying to find out the best mechanic because they know there's so many around that will overcharge you. So you waste hours and hours trying to find a good, reputable mechanic to fix your car. So consumers may end up wasting time, and they also get overcharged. That's both inefficient. And finally, with vitamins and minerals, sometimes products will claim that they do things that they don't, like suppress appetite or promote weight loss, when it's not actually the case. If this proves false, there's an under-allocation of resources, an over-allocation of resources to these products. Too many people buy these products when they don't really need them, and they don't do what they say they will do. Others may under-allocate resources to vitamins that could help because they've become too skeptical of because of these bad sellers, and therefore people don't actually get access to products that they need because they're too skeptical. Okay, so when you're explaining why the existence of asymmetric information can lead to an inefficient allocation of resources, define asymmetric information. For example, market failure can occur when a business is able to entice consumers to purchase products based on misleading or deceptive claims. The fact that businesses possess more information about their products than consumers means they often make false claims about the quality or price, which then distorts consumers' decision-making and makes them make uninformed or inefficient choices. Use an example there, like your car salesman would probably be easier. In this respect, the market fails to protect consumers from purchasing products that they would not ordinarily purchase, leading to an over-allocation to the production of these products. In the long run, it can actually result in under-allocation of resources to the products from reputable buyers because then consumers fear they're being ripped off. Go both ways with your answer. Thank you.